what shots, when I look at your physiques, I can say, well, I think Derek has Nick in this shot. I think Nick has Derek in this shot. And I think if, this happens, then maybe it could go this way.
The shots, I think Derek will beat me on.
Best.
I will always give him front double. I'll give him the back double. No shit talking. I rock his world in the side shot. I rock his world. Most Muscular is not even a competition.
I love messing with Nick.
Hey guys, welcome back to Project Bodybuilding. So what you just saw at the beginning there was a series of clips from the latest episode of the Mutant in the Mouth podcast. Derek and Nick, as well as Guy Cisternino and Chris Aceto, all gave their 2 cents on who they thought wins each shot with Derek and Nick at their best up until this point. Now I have done comparisons with Derek and Nick pretty recently too, but I haven't done one where I think they are both at their best to date. So let's go ahead and try it out. This video is going to be a bit of a longer one because I'm going to play what these guys had to say about each shot at the beginning of the pose, and then give my opinions and score these guys in my regular format with my normal judging system. Now I do think this is an incredibly relevant comparison. Nick is saying that he's not just interested in being Nick Talker, he wants to come back better than ever. And he's going to need to because the competition around him has only gotten better and deeper. And for Derek, I'm sure he would like to think that he has surpassed even Nick's best versions at this point. On top of those sentiments, there are rumblings of Derek jumping into this year's Pittsburgh Pro, which would pit him and Nick head to head at a big show with a big prize for the winner. So this is going to be a very relevant but thorough comparison, and a very fun one, at least I think so. Does Derek Lunsford at his best in each shot beat Nick Walker at his best in each shot? Let's jump into today's video to find out. Remember, if you guys like these types of videos, be sure to hit the like button and subscribe for more.
All-time best.
I will always give him front double.
At the front double, I would agree that I take that one.
So both of these guys were very quick to give the first shot the front double to Derek, but I would be a little more cautious. Now of course we have to talk about what each gentleman's best version is. For this comparison, I decided to differ this for each pose for one. I truly wanted this to be both guys at their best with the most ideal scenario. So I'm not making myself stick to any single version for every single pose. For Derek though, every one of his poses will be from the 2024 Olympia. I stand by that version as his absolute best. Much better than his Olympia winning package in fact. For Nick, he's a bit different because he has brought a ton of different looks. But the 2 main versions I used for this video were the 2022 Mr. Olympia version and the 2023 Arnold Classic version. And sometimes I included both for some food for thought. Like in this pose, 2022 is on the left and 2023 is on the right. And you can see that they are pretty different packages. Let's first talk about Derek and how he compares to the 2022 Olympia version of Nick. If we're going by this matchup, then I do agree with the guys on this one. I have Derek winning solidly on shape. Nick is just a little too freaky for me. Now, he's got the goods, superior quality in the legs and throughout the whole body, diced abs, a pretty tight waist for a mutant, and fantastic arms. He honestly makes this close even though it isn't my cup of tea. But he's forcing his way in there on size, freak factor, and completeness. But what about Derek versus the 2023 version? This is a hot take. I could honestly have Nick winning with this version and with this type of posing. Legs to legs, Nick wins. He once again has the superior quality and more depth. Still kind of stubby though, his structure isn't the best. But moving along to the midsection, he actually has awesome taper with this pose, and you definitely can't say otherwise. And in the arms, it's once again no contest. So overall, I think we have to take an average here. Now in my comparisons, I like to include a margin of victory point system. So in my comparisons, if an athlete wins a pose barely, he takes it with 1 point, all the way up to a 3-point win symbolizing an absolute knockout win. Derek versus the 2022 version probably gets closer to a 2-point win if you really just want that shape. But again, Nick has it all except that, and he schools Derek in everything else. Muscularity, conditioning, arms, everything but the torso shape goes to Nick in that version. And in the 2023 version, yeah, I would probably have Nick winning because he has the shape there, at least good enough for open bodybuilding. And because it's open bodybuilding, he wins the pose because he wins everything else with the 2023 version. Overall, these are very different versions, but averaged together, I'm not giving Derek a very large win here. Shape is the most important thing, and over both of these versions of Nick, he wins on that. But I'm only going to give him a single point here. If you're a bodybuilding purist, you're probably going to make an argument for Nick here, and honestly, I'd be fine with it. I see this as largely a coin flip, so it's going to be close. We're going to go ahead and make the front lat spread quick. They didn't really talk about it, and it is just kind of a given, I guess. Nick is never winning this one, so picking a version was really whatever here. Oddly enough, I went with his 2024 New York Pro version because although the gut was at its worst, he had the best lats here. He has better lats, or at least much better lat visibility than Derek here, in fact. But of course, that gut prevents any margin he may have built up with the win through the lats. Derek is honestly kind of poor in this one though. I don't really like him, and he's getting beat in the most important aspect, that being the lats, so I'm going to put him down for a win at a pretty solid 2 points, but not quite 3.
No shit talking. I rock his world in the side shots. I rock his world.
I think you both are very impressive from the side.
He does have a crazy side chest. However, I think that my balance and the improvements that I've made on my chest and the conditioning.
Let's call it like this. Let's call it not what it's going to be, your best as of yet. And
I still think that my Mr. Olympia side chest takes it. And I mean, you can make that argument.
Alright, so in the side chest, we actually had some heated debate. Nick is saying it's no contest. Derek is saying he can at least edge him out in this one, but it's very close. Well, believe it or not, I actually side with Derek more on this one than Nick. When Nick left the Mr. Olympia stage in 2022, he left with one of the strongest side chests out there, and one that was easily beating Derek's. He beat the 2023 Derek, he beat the 2022 Derek, but 2024 Derek is different. Like he said, he made improvements and he has narrowed the gap. Now, I did include 2 versions of Nick here, 2022 on the left and 2024 on the right, but honestly, I don't really think it changes that much. In the side leg, I have Nick winning slightly with either version. Derek is really detailed, he has a very good grainy quality to his side leg, but Nick is bigger and has similar graininess, so the lower half goes to the mutant. Moving up, Derek does have a little midsection issue that I always point out. It's very minor, but it still bugs me, but Nick Walker has a little issue keeping the stomach locked in his 2024 version as well. Then moving up even more, we have to give Nick Walker the arm and delt. But this is another area where Derek's improvements have allowed him to narrow the gap significantly. And finally, in terms of the actual muscle groups, that brings us to the pecs. Honestly, if you look at 2022 to 2024, it seems like Nick's chest is getting smaller, so that's interesting. I actually prefer how much more surface area the pecs take up on the 2022 version though, compared to the bunched up ones on 2024. Either way, I think Derek beats him genetically. He has the broader, squarer chest he always has, but now he has added even more size and some detail. His far pec actually showcases more detail than Nick's. Derek's far pec is also just bigger compared to Nick's. And that adds a major hurdle to this pose if Nick Walker wants to win because he is losing the namesake. On top of that, the upper and lower limbs weren't exactly his biggest wins. Nick is a bit more impressive overall when you look at him in totality, but with Derek getting bigger, Nick isn't getting a massive win in overall size. All in all, I hate to say it, but I have Derek here. I think right now, that's what I'm doing. I'm putting Derek down for a 1-point win. But I could easily see Nick Walker winning 2, but if I did, I'd also have him scoring just 1 point here, so I'm very torn. I think we can all concede one thing though. This is not a rocking of anyone's world, contrary to what Nick says.
Both 100, like straight up.
Yeah,
100.
both 100% your all-time best.
I will always give him front double. I'll give him the back double.
Back double and rear lat spread, I think, are my money shots.
For this pose, I actually don't have a whole lot of pushback. I think this one is fairly predictable, but I still want to look at 2 versions for Nick, just for an in-depth look. Firstly, here we have the 2023 Arnold Classic version versus Derek's recent Olympia version. Now, this is the smaller version of Nick, but that comes with a lot more detail in this package, which should help in the rear double pose since that's what it's all about. However, even with that extra detail compared to some of his other versions, Nick is just getting outmassed here. Derek is carrying so much muscle on his back and is the definition of 3D. And of course, he is also very detailed. Nick has a very hard and dry look with a jagged lower back and the overall grainy look to his back, but Derek just makes him look flat by comparison. What I mean when I'm describing Derek is the actual thickness of the back. Like if you turn these guys to the side, Derek's back would be coming off of his spine way more than Nick's. There's just more meat. And Nick isn't just losing the back, I throw the delts in there for Derek too, believe it or not, but Nick wins the bicep peaks. One thing Nick does have a semi-strong win in though is the lower half. His hamstrings are maybe some of the best ever, but Derek does keep this area pretty close with his shredded glutes and surprisingly strong quad sweeps. Now we have the 2022 version of Nick to look at, and this package is definitely a more massive version, but a one that is slightly less conditioned. He still packs a ton of that trademark graininess though. I did really want to include this version because I think not a whole lot changes, and that's pretty important. Nick is really strong in the back, but Derek is just on another level. And the lower body still goes to Nick, but Derek scores scores a win in the glutes again. I do think this is the stronger of the two versions for Nick though, and I suppose there is an argument for just a 1-point win for Derek here, but with the 2023 package, I would say it has to be a 2-pointer. And overall, I am going to just play it safe and give the overall average to Derek being 2 points. But what's interesting to note is that when I've done this comparison before in the past, I've had this much closer. In 2022 and 2023, I would usually just have Derek winning by 1 point. Now, I don't think the gap in the back is small enough to do that. Derek is expanding his strong point, and it was already leagues above everyone else's anyway. I would still say Nick has the second best back in the world next to Derek, but the gap between first and second seems to be growing. The rear lat spread is one of the more interesting poses. For one, Nick's best version is actually his most recent package here, and that's mainly because of posing. He's posing very tall and actually spreading his lats, which he's had trouble doing throughout his career. When he does spread his wings though, he is wider than Derek. Not by the biggest margin, however. But Derek retorts by bringing a much thicker back. Like in the rear double, Derek kinda makes Nick look a little thin, and this goes for the lats and the entire back really. So overall, at least up top, it's closer. Nick once again wins the lower half though for the third time. And overall, I go back and forth on this one, but today I am going with Nick. He has the better lower body and the better width. But since I go back and forth on this one, I'm going to keep it at just a 1-pointer for him.
No shit talking. I rock his world in the side shots.
Side tricep,
I think I would give you the side try. I would give Nick the side chest. That's if I was.
We'll just like leave that one as like a
Yeah.
I was very surprised when I heard what all of them said about the side tricep. Nick was cocky, of course. He said he'd win from the side just outright, whether that's the side chest or side tricep. But Guy and Derek beating around the bush, calling this a draw, is laughable. In my opinion, this is one of the easiest poses to determine in this entire matchup, and I didn't even need to look at it. This is Nick's pose all day, and believe it or not, he's very strong because of the midsection. In this pose, at least, he's always been able to lock in regardless of what package he brings. Derek, on the other hand, is notoriously soft, puffy, and lacking detail in his midsection. Derek is very large overall now. He's holding up quite well in overall size. We know he has a great side leg and a decent tricep for this pose, but that midsection just ruins the pose for me every time I see it. Once again, I did include two versions of Nick, and I think they both easily dispatch our brother Derek. 2023 on the left here was the smallest version of Nick, but the most conditioned and streamlined. He matches Derek in side leg detail, not the pecs though because Nick was fairly flat, but Nick definitely wins in the tricep. And yeah, the midsection of course, that's a massive win. And in 2022, he's just bigger. I went back and forth as to which version I like more in the shot, but I decided I do like 2022 the most. He's even fuller in the pecs, which really helps because that is one area Derek does beat him in. Then Nick beats Derek in the tricep even more with this version, and the side leg as well. And even with one of his mass monster type of versions, Nick still brings a much better midsection. I'll cut Derek a little slack because all of his surrounding body parts are great, but that midsection is way too distracting. This is going to be a solid 2-point win for Nick. Again, I'm very surprised none of these guys were bullish on this one except for Nick. I think Nick has the best side triceps in the world right now.
And I'll even give him the ab and thigh.
Now, last year's ab thigh at the Olympia was not my best. I changed up my posing and I didn't like it. But I think Chris can also agree that my ab thigh has changed drastically.
Well, he agrees. Well, Nick gave you abs and thigh.
Yeah.
Surprisingly, there wasn't a whole lot of talk on the abs and thighs. Nick was quick to give it up to Derek, but Derek knows his pose is shit, so all he said was, well, it's getting better. Honestly though, maybe that was Nick throwing Derek a bone. Maybe he just doesn't want to give it to him now, talk his game, and then shows up with a bubble gut and get clowned for it. But we are talking about their previous best versions to this date. So if you really go back and look, this is another one of those shots where there is actually a clear winner. And yes, it is in fact Nick Walker. Now, what a prime Nick is in this case for this shot was the 2023 Arnold, which was his most streamlined version, and with this package, if I only included abs to abs, Nick probably wins on 3 points. Nick's abs are very developed. He has that good type of blockiness and he has much deeper separation between them. Derek's are also just kind of weird looking. I don't really know why. They're like really separated in some places, but terribly shallow in others. And Nick also wins the legs here. And yet again, Nick wins the legs here. They're just more developed. They have a better level of depth and condition to them. And I think they fit his physique more than Derek's fit his. And honestly, although Derek loses the abs and the legs, the biggest problem for me is actually more so the waist waistline. Nick is trim and tight, and Derek is extremely wide, wider than Nick the Brick Walker. But I know some of you guys are going to want me to include Derek's vacuum, and I will oblige. He hit the crunch abs first, so it's only fair, and you know, it's something that Nick Walker can't do. But something Derek can't do is win the actual pose, which is obviously more important. But of course, his vacuum is great, and we have to include it. So I'll walk back from that 3-point win I was going to Nick, but hesitantly. I'm only doing this because the IFBB looks at the vacuum too, and I want to include all perspectives, including those of you that want the vacuum even in open. It's at least something, so I'll knock a point off of Nick's margin, so he's just going to get 2 points, but let's make no mistake about this. Nick was being humble in his clip for this one, surprisingly. With or especially without the vacuum, Nick does rock Derek's world in the abs and thighs.
Most muscular is not even a competition.
Most muscular I give you.
Most muscular, Nick has a pretty crazy most muscular.
Yeah,
don't even debate that one, bro. Let's
Most muscular, he doesn't stand a chance.
Alright, now we have the last pose of the comparison, and Derek was quick to back off, and of course Nick was eager to boast about this one. Well, Nick does have a lot to brag about here, he has a great pose, but Derek should honestly not be too quick to concede. It comes down to his improvements, and it's kind of like the side chest. His most muscular and side chest weren't that good in 2022 and 2023, and I felt Nick could beat those versions easily in that pose and this one. But Derek made his 2024 most muscular pose a force to be reckoned with, and that's what's happening here. For one, Derek is pretty wide in the upper body, and now he's added a lot of size, so he's looking pretty big next to Nick Walker. And Derek has worked on one of his main weaknesses being a lack of detail. But of course, Nick Walker is still the mutant. I actually used his 2024 package here because I thought honestly it looked to be his biggest, and he had the better legs over 2022, which was the version I was about to use. And speaking of legs, he is winning over Derek here. Now Derek does a lot better here than any of his other poses, but Nick's are just way more conditioned, and I know I'm using this word a lot, but they just have more depth. Derek has that new muscle look, and Nick has an insane level of development and muscle maturity for his age. And since Nick's covering his waist, his legs really don't look that small. Then in the midsection, both guys really aren't that great. Nick can't crunch down on his abs fully in this version, but Derek's separation and blockiness to the abs isn't the best. However, I would still go with him. Then we have the chest, which I probably have to give to Derek. He has the better chest genetically, as we discussed earlier, so he's bigger, and now he's added detail, and Nick can't beat him on that alone. So yeah, this is going to Derek. The arms and shoulders are definitely going to Nick though. They're his best body parts. He has a freaky level of muscularity, higher in muscle quality compared to Derek, and he's more conditioned. And finally, from the overall perspective, Nick has a ton of freak factor of course, but Derek is stout and wide and carries a lot of muscle at this point. He's pushing Nick, what can I say? And not just from the overall perspective, Derek has good body parts and details now. However, I'd like to think I know better, and I think I know how this would look in real life. Even here, I think Nick does get a slight win for his better details, hardness, and freak factor. I don't think Derek will ever actually be able to peel this one away from Nick. That would be really hard to do, and I don't think he's doing it just yet. But he's making it close. I'm just going to give Nick a single point win here in the final pose of this comparison. Now we have the second round of judging the overall physique categories, where we take a look at the overall shape, muscularity, conditioning, and flaws of each athlete. Starting with muscularity, this is a close one, and Derek can thank his size gains for that. Sure, he is weak in the legs, and that hurts his muscularity, but Nick is kind of weak too. Overall though, Nick would actually probably still win the legs. He's taller, he has more freak factor, and better muscle quality, so I'm giving him a small 1-point win. Nick is also going to follow this up with a 1-point win in conditioning. In any version we used, he was overall harder, drier, and more even with his conditioning. Derek can hang in most areas and beat him in some like the glutes, but he has trouble areas like the midsection and the chest and shoulders region. And finally, I want to address the last two categories together, which are flaws and shape. This is kind of spicy. It is important to note that shape and flaws are very different. Yes, Nick's shape and structure are a little odd, and Derek is going to win the shape category really easy because of that. However, with Nick's best versions, he doesn't have a gut. He just has a wider waist and stubby quads compared to most bodybuilders. But that's included in shape, so outside of that, what is there to hit Nick on for in the flaws category? Nothing. In Nick's prime, I wouldn't even say his shape is bad. Definitely not good, but this is open bodybuilding and definitely gets a pass. Yes, he is top heavy because of the legs, but Derek's balance isn't perfect either. So in order to quantify what I'm thinking about these categories, here's the compromise I came up with. I won't over-represent Derek's flaws, but I'm not going to harp on Nick's shape either. Derek is going to win that category with 2 points, but I'm just going to leave the flaws category blank. These are not perfect physiques, pretty obviously so, but by cutting some slack to Derek here, I'm going to have to cut Nick some slack in shape. And finally, it's time to reveal the final scores, and today I'm just ripping the band-aid off. This comparison came out to a perfect 50-50 tie. And you know what? I kinda agree with it. I do want to plant my feet on one side of this comparison, but before I give you my personal conclusion, I want to highlight perhaps the most important piece of this comparison. The gap between these two has narrowed considerably. Like it or not, most of you won't, Derek has improved enough to get this close even to Nick's best versions. My opinion is changing too. Well, maybe not changing, but it's evolving with the situation. Now for some context, if you ask me, Nick should have beaten Derek at the 2022 Mr. Olympia. He maybe should have even won that event entirely, but most definitely he should have been second, beating Derek at that show. And with his 2023 Arnold Classic version, I think he'd beat Derek's 2023 Olympia winning version. I don't think Derek had any business winning the Olympia. So take it from me, until very recently, the gap between Nick and Derek has been large. However, now Derek has added a lot of muscle and worked on the details. So regardless of where you plant your feet, I think we can all agree that the gap has narrowed, and is narrow at this point in time. But if you want to know where I plant my feet, that would be in the camp of Nick Walker. Now, of course, this comparison did kind of favor Nick because of his type of physique. Chris Aceto said the same thing in this podcast. Nick can bring a variety of different physiques, but they all can be dangerous. The 2023 Arnold and the 2022 Olympia are pretty different versions for being the same person, but both are still fantastic. So Nick had the advantage of being able to swap out into pretty different packages depending on what was needed. Derek wasn't exactly handicapped. I did use his best version in every single shot, but Nick has the added bonus of being able to have some variety. So there's that, but all the reasons I have Nick winning are pretty consistent between both versions. The main one is quality. Nick by far has the superior density, hardness, dryness, muscle maturity, all those adjectives associated with quality you can say about Nick more than Derek. I also think when Nick is at his best, he has less flaws than Derek, because his shape is passable for open bodybuilding, especially if you're considering the 2023 Arnold as his best. On top of having less to nitpick, he is also probably more well-rounded. Nick is special in that his back poses don't allow Derek to open up a big lead, unlike most of Derek's other opponents. And Derek's big weakness, the legs, is one that I think Nick would win consistently from every angle. So although the gap is narrowed, I do think Nick still has the edge if both of these guys were operating at their bests at this given point. That is an important caveat. And it's important because honestly, this isn't even my prediction. I really don't think Nick can beat Derek again, to be brutally honest, much to my chagrin. Even 2022 Nick didn't beat Derek in the eyes of the judges. Not to mention the judging seems to be a little more shape focused now, and we know Nick is never going to be the best, not even close, even at his best. And of course, this comparison and my conclusion was done in a favorable scenario to Nick, and even then it's close, I'll admit. It's also important to note in this video that Nick's two best versions are almost 2 years old at this point. His most recent 2024 package, while used some in this comparison, is not beating Derek head to head, I can tell you that much, in my eyes or the judges. Currently, Nick's trajectory is down, and while Derek's placings may have slipped a little, his physique is actually getting better. So overall, I have two different thoughts to end this video with. Yes, I think the gap has narrowed, and Derek is probably going to keep placing ahead of Nick, and that's what I'm predicting. But this is my comparison, and based on what I saw, with both athletes at their current bests, I have Nick Walker, the mutant, taking this win, so he is the winner of today's comparison. Well, that's going to do it for today's video. I want to know what you guys think about this comparison as well as your predictions. Do you think Nick at his best beats Derek at his best? And do you think that's how the judges would see it? And what's going to happen the next time these guys face off? So in the comments below, leave me your thoughts and your predictions. And if you like this video, remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more. And if you want to support the channel even further and are in need of some high quality supplements, be sure to head over to Arms Race Nutrition. Then at checkout, use my code Project10 for 10% off your entire order. That's code Project10 at armsracenutrition.com. And finally, with all that said, I want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.
Gotta get that Lexi, yeah.